Mukthi. So, basically what is life all about? What are we trying to do? We are trying to be free of suffering. All people suffer. There are only three types of suffering. Physical suffering, which you all know. Psychological suffering, that also you know. Problems in your family, problems in your profession, all kinds of other problems. Hurt, pain, anger, frustration, conflict, all this is psychological suffering. And then there is a third suffering, which is called existential suffering. So you would either have physical suffering or psychological suffering or existential suffering. Any one of these you must have. You cannot be free of all the three forms of suffering. That is why there is this oneness equation on suffering. Physical suffering plus psychological suffering plus existential suffering is equal to a constant. If one comes down, the other will go up. If somebody is saying, I have no suffering at all, then he is either awakened, or he is lying, or he is a fool. Because you cannot violate the Buddha's noble teaching. All existence is suffering. The Four Noble Truths, the first truth, all existence is suffering. So you have to be awakened, otherwise there is suffering. Either one of these forms of suffering, physical or psychological or existential. Take the Buddha for example. He was a prince, he had all that you could imagine, everything he had. A wonderful wife, a great father, everything. His father had given him 3 summer palaces and 750 dancing girls to keep him entertained. But then he was suffering. And what do you call that suffering? Existential suffering. It was so severe because he had no physical suffering, he had no psychological suffering. He gave up his wife, he gave up his kingdom, rode off in the night on his horse, and then cut off his hair and became a monk till he became awakened. So, Mukti is all about ending this suffering. And what is the suffering? Existence is suffering. That is, if you exist, then you suffer. If you exist as a separate entity, if you say, I am this, I am so and so, that individual existence is suffering. It is not that you are suffering, no. You equal to suffering. If you say, I am there, that only is suffering, not that you suffer. If you say that you exist, that is as a separate entity, no oneness with all that is, but as a separate entity, that only is suffering. So that suffering is essentially existential suffering, which becomes psychological suffering, which becomes physical suffering. But that is the root. So what do? People don't want to exist. They are intuitively aware that if I forget myself, if I am gone, there is no suffering. So how do they do it? They take alcohol, they drink all kinds of drinks, because then you can forget yourself. They take drugs, then there is sex, and then what not. So all these things are used for what? To forget themselves. Why do you take drugs? To forget yourself. Why do you indulge in sex? To forget yourself. Why do you take alcohol? To forget yourself.